My guardian was a rigid Presbyterian and was, I believe, a good man. I would have been born around 1800. And according to Vermont's 1777 Constitution, all men have certain natural, inherent, and unalienable rights, and that no adult without consent ought to be beholden by law to serve any person as a servant, slave, or apprentice. However, a loophole in the law allowed children to be held in slavery. A man named Gould from New York State was a routine visitor at the Pages' home. As part of my regular duties, I would wait on him. Gould ran a hotel out of his home and asked me to come and live with his family. Eventually, I agreed to this. Gould used me very kindly for several days, and I generally contrived those on whom I waited and grew rather fond of the landlord. On a visit from Page, Gould asked me to turn me over to him permanently. Page would only allow this if I agreed. And after much coaxing, I agreed, and the writings were drawn up and signed. In other words, I was sold. After becoming the property of Gould, his attitude changed considerably towards me. From that day, to me, Gould was an entirely different man. He did not abuse me, but I had to put up with much hardships from my master's family. He set the example of ill treatment, and they followed it. Gould had several children, some young, and an adult son, an adopted son, Lyman Holly. Lyman had been involved with a group of smugglers, likely in the Lake Champlain area. While being pursued by the law, a toll gate keeper was shot and killed. I was charged with the theft. Gould looked at me and began to prepare the whip. I told him I did not take it. He thought that I was acting and adding falsehood to the crime, and laid hold of me to apply the lash. I told my owner, if you whip me, I will tell where Lyman Holly is. This stopped Gould in a moment. He began to question his children and realized that I was innocent. However, he did threaten that I would never be seen again if I mentioned the whereabouts of Lyman. Sometime later, Gould took me to Lake Champlain. At the lake, I met Gould's eldest son and his friend, Captain Ross. The two young men invited me to tour the sloop, and took me down in the cabin to continue the tour. When we appeared on deck, the sloop was sailing far from shore. I began to cry and implore them to bring me back. My grief was so violent that Ross pitied me, and by way of consideration, told me that he was not taking me for northern Terminus, down to the south and more slavery. When we landed, I was handed over to Colonel Daniel Bissell. I learned that Bissell was a large slave owner and speculated in slaves. His treatment of recent purchases was oftentimes harsh and cruel. Though I tried to do the best of my ability, many failures brought many whippings, and my lacerated back and shoulders caused me many a sleepless night. In the spring of 1814, Bissell was promoted to Major General. He then moved west and was stationed in Buffalo, New York. Here, I was to take care of the Colonel's Marquis of 10th, a job I found easy to do. One of Bissell's friends while in Buffalo was Captain John G. Camp. Camp was a quartermaster. The two officers regularly spent evenings together. During a night of gambling, I became part of the stakes wagered. Bissell